The following review contains spoilers for the film Hereditary. Proceed with caution. It's not a stretch to say we're living in something of a renaissance where scary movies are concerned. There have been monumentally disappointing outliers, to be certain, but recent years have given us not only 2014's The Babadook, an at first unassuming tale of a mom and her son set upon by a storybook phantom that takes a genuinely sincere look at grief, loss, and the very real terror of motherhood, but 2017's challenging instant classic directorial debut from Jordan Peele, Get Out, an equal parts frightening and thought-provoking examination of the often covetous nature of racism, and 2016's sparse and disquieting The Vavitch.
That's not how it's pronounced.
A slow-boiled yarn about the perils of patriarchy and paranoia that pits a pious 17th century Puritan family against an unspeakable evil lurking in the woods beyond their home. And then there's my personal favorite, 2015's It Follows, a timeless John Carpenter-styled scarefest about teenagers cursed to flee from a silent, sexually transmitted entity that pursues them tirelessly at all times. Even with all these new greats making the rounds, it's not every day a horror movie the sheer caliber of Hereditary comes along, which is saying something when you take into consideration this is also the same year that gave us such enthralling and original masterclasses in tension and terror like Annihilation and A Quiet Place. In this stellar debut, writer-director Ari Aster delivers an instantly unforgettable exercise in unyielding and oppressive terror that works its way into the skin, taking root in the psyche where it not only lingers but festers, inviting you to pore over its every minute and meticulously placed detail long after the final credits have rolled. It's a film I've been eagerly anticipating as far back as that initial trailer, which was so vague and purposefully withholding that it all but demanded your attendance. Not only was Hereditary more than worth the wait, it held the honor of having more rewatch value than a number of its contemporaries. Like an Edgar Wright film without the luxury of laughs, it features a lean, efficient script that is all muscle and no fat, one packed with clues, hints, and details so small some are nigh impossible to catch up on the first watch, and would likely have bankrupted you from repeated viewings in the theater if you attempted to finally spot them all. It's one of those movies where everything you need is right there before your eyes the entire time, and revisiting it with full knowledge of what's to come lends it a level of satisfaction that is hard to come by. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This chilling and proficient account follows Annie, the matriarch of an already troubled but very soon-to-be terrorized family who has just laid her mother to rest. Not 1 week later, they are told her grave has been desecrated, the body stolen, and in even less time, Annie begins to sense and even see her deceased mother around the house. Oh, and speaking of their house...
Wow! This place is great!
First off, it's in the middle of a gorgeous sprawling swath of forested nowhere that only contributes to the mounting isolation, both emotional and geographical, that the family is made to endure throughout. The opening shot is a fantastic slow zoom into the upstairs bedroom of a beautiful dollhouse, or at least that's what we think. It is well established by the trailers that Annie is an artist and sculptor who creates intricate miniatures, and we are meant to believe this to be one of them. Yet when the bedroom door opens, revealing flesh and blood characters, the very first clues as to the nature of the story set to unfold begins to lay its bedrock foundation. The family members at the story's heart, like dolls themselves, are subject to the whims and the mercy, or lack thereof, of enormous forces beyond their comprehension or control. They are not the masters of their own fate, but if they aren't, who is, and why? Well, that we'll get to. Back to the house for a second. Like I said, it's a
nice place you've got here. Lots of space.
The shadowy passages of their eerily cavernous dollhouse-like home play host to no end of nightmares, scares designed to maximize every inch of the frame, frequently granting the viewer terrifying information only seconds before the players themselves. It is its own character, the house, and one well fitting the narrative. Annie, played as confidently as I think I've probably ever seen by Little Miss Sunshine's Toni Collette, whom I can only describe as being at the peak of her powers here, gives nothing short of her full commitment in this performance. I'll be genuinely surprised if her name doesn't come up at least a few times as award season inches ever closer. And if she doesn't win, I'm fearful of what might come from such a decision. The usual suspect's own Gabriel Byrne, who plays Annie's put-upon husband Steve, frustrates with his pragmatic yet ineffectual efforts to guide his family through their increasing turmoil while simultaneously impressing with his all-too-realistic reactions to everything he's subjected to. A therapist himself, he's easily the only character of indisputably sound mind here, which regrettably doesn't save him. In a way, he almost stands in for the audience, what with his very vocal disapproval over ideas that always seem to spell trouble in horror movies, such as holding seances and attempting to set fire to occult artifacts. His attitude throughout the film is basically just,
"You're making me tired all over."
It's almost sad that being the sole voice of reason in this earns him so little. Alex Wolff plays Peter, Annie and Steve's teenage son, whose easily dismissible weed and girl-obsessed demeanor serves as the ultimate curveball, a narrative headfake that is at once subversive and oh so satisfying. His personality, in scary movie terms at least, practically screams, "Look at me, I die first." And this is by design, this overt and clearly marked roadmap into familiar territory, but believe me when I say the film has far loftier plans for him that you will not see coming. Second to Colette, the family member likely to leave the strongest lasting impression on you has to be Charlie, a macabre, disconcerting 13-year-old played with frightful execution by Millie Shapiro. There is a long and proud history of creepy children in the horror movie genre, and Charlie joins that pantheon seemingly without effort. There is no part of her performance that doesn't unsettle, doesn't make your flesh writhe. Rarely do you encounter a character that exudes this level of just pure discomfort. She's frumpy and awkward, keeps a sketchbook of creepy drawings, makes freakish toys out of household scraps, emits a grotesque click of the throat, a near gag reflex that becomes the single most terrifying sound in the entire movie, and has a penchant for beheading dead birds that end up, well, God knows where, really.
Pretty bird. Yeah, can you say pretty bird? Yes, pretty bird.
The never unimpressive Ann Dowd plays Joan, a grieving mother who befriends Annie while lamenting the passing of her grandson. Warm and sympathetic, she happens along exactly when she's needed most, almost as though their meeting were scripted, offering a supportive shoulder and a friendly ear. But this is Ann Dowd, after all, and whatever distrustful instincts you likely have regarding her are, I assure you, quite justified.
You know you should have killed that bitch!
But more on that in a moment. Let me jump into a quick tangent here. Whether conscious of it or not, we as viewers piece together what direction we think a movie will go in when we watch trailers. It's just something we do. And we often complain, rightly so, that previews give away too much. You see certain images in trailers out of context and try to deduce where and how they're connected to the story at large. This moment from the Fight Club trailer, this shot from the trailer for Batman v Superman Dawn of whatever, and basically any scary shot from the trailer for It Comes at Night, aren't actually things that happen in the films. They're dreams and visions, which, while not explicitly a cheat or a dodge, does kind of feel like one once you're in the seat after having spent in upwards of $15 to get there.
God damn it!
Even this shot from the Hereditary trailer made me say, oh, that's probably from a nightmare or a dream sequence or something. No way there's just a guy on fire in Toni Collette's living room. Well, actually, this is just one way the movie takes your years of learned horror movie genre expectations and turns them inside out. Okay, so there's a spoiler alert at the beginning of this, but if you didn't take that seriously, this is your last chance to,
Get out.
I brought up all that stuff about being able to guess where a movie's going based on its trailer because, while the preview for Hereditary deliberately withholds a great deal, you believe you're safe in assuming that Charlie's probably going to be alright at the end. And why wouldn't she be? She's basically the Carol Ann of this production, if Carol Ann were an oddly discomfiting teen with a severe gift for doling out the Wiggins with endless abandon. As it turns out, the aforementioned assumption couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, not only is Charlie not safe, not a willing recipient of plot armor as it's sometimes called, it can be argued that she is doomed from the start, and in truth, dead from the moment we first meet her. In a harrowing scene in which Peter takes Charlie to a high school party only to have her go into anaphylactic shock as a result of an earlier established nut allergy, she is decapitated by a telephone pole on the drive back. Ooh. This happens less than a third of the way through the movie. Now let me tell you why that's a big deal. It is a rare gift when a movie throws a scene at you so hard and so fast you're forced to reevaluate not only what you thought it was going to be about, but which characters are destined for what lot. This is one of the film's greatest triumphs. The moment Charlie dies, all bets are off, and you no longer know where the story is going. You no longer know what the movie is doing. Any comfort or security you may have had in its unfolding is gone. It instills you with the same dread and uncertainty the characters themselves are facing, heightening your fear and tension all the more.
I'm freaking out, man.
Now here come some spoilers for Rosemary's Baby, so if you haven't seen that, you might want to bail, but since that movie's about 150,000 years old, you can't say you haven't had your chance. Hereditary reminds me of a lot of things that came before it, like The Omen, The Exorcist, and The Wicker Man. No, not that one. There we go, that's better. But it's Rosemary's Baby that was at the forefront of my mind the entire time. It's a slow roll, this unostentatious tale of an expectant mother who falls victim to the machinations of a demonic cult with devious designs for her unborn child. You spend the majority of that movie merely wondering what's happening, where it's headed, and by the time the film's intent makes itself clear, that being a monstrous plot to forcibly impregnate a woman with the devil's child, even though at that point you may have already come to the conclusion on your own, you're powerless to do anything about it. Your knowledge won't save you. The end comes whether you want it to or not. Hereditary follows a number of the same beats, but I would argue to more devastating and lasting effect. It is haunting. There are moments when you just have to turn and say,
"You watching this shit, man? It's fucked up."
As earlier stated, all the clues are there and literally from the start. At the funeral for Annie's mother, she says to the crowd who've gathered to pay their respects,
"So many strange new faces here today."
It's easy to simply chalk that up to them being friends of the deceased, but the truth is so much more sinister. Annie chides her late mother for being secretive in life, but it's an understatement to say the least. We later discover her mother was the head of a cult, a virtual queen over worshippers of a demon called Payman, who is revered as one of the 8 kings of hell, and devoted much of her life to securing and preparing a suitable host for the being to inhabit in exchange for the ever-corrupting, combined elixir that is wealth and power. Despite her death, these cult members remain loyal to the cause, and dedicated to realizing the dreams of their leader, so much to the point where they are always near, always interfering, always steering the family's path, and almost wholly without their knowledge. This is where Joan comes in, and now that we're neck deep in spoiler territory, I can give Ann Dowd her richly deserved due. Joan, we discover, knew Annie's mother both well and for some time, having served alongside her as an acolyte in the cult of Payman. Here, she deftly feigns concern for Annie's well-being during her bereavement over Charlie, while clandestinely masterminding the unconscionable schemes of the cult. She puts in diabolical work, this at first self-effacing subordinate to the true darkness that hovers just out of sight throughout the ordeal, and she is more than equal to the task. Though not as overtly sinister as her insidious character from the Emmy Award-winning Handmaid's Tale, she is in this outing no less monstrous, and worthy of praise for a calculated and understated performance, one of calm, masking madness.
I told you you should have killed that bitch.
Joan and the cult of Payman's devious handiwork, as well as their arcane symbology, are in the backgrounds of so many scenes, ever present and always watching. Payman is an ancient evil and incredibly powerful.
You're like the buzzing of flies to him.
However, it is said he is male and therefore favors a male host, but at her husband's instruction, Peter was kept a safe distance from Annie's mother in his childhood, a precautionary measure taken even though they knew not what to be cautious of. Charlie, as it turned out, wasn't so fortunate. The child's so unsettling nature, it is alluded, is a result of her being an imperfect host for the demon, probably since birth. And this isn't even the first time the movie makes such a connection. While attending a support group for the bereaved, Annie goes into great detail about the unknown afflictions that have plagued her family, including a brother who committed suicide after making the rather bold but later we learn saddening claim that their mother once tried to put people inside him.
Looks like it didn't take.
It's heartbreaking once you reach the end of the movie and look back on everything you've seen, as that's when you realize Charlie was never actually Charlie, but rather a broken vessel housing a malevolent force yearning only to be free of her. When she dies, and horribly at that, the cult of Payman sets their sights on Peter, beginning a psychological assault on both him and his family that leaves them splintered. The family is doomed from the beginning, cursed by something terrible and primeval that has hung over them for decades. It's traumatic and at first beyond their understanding, this malignant inherited cancer that has for whatever reason elected to eat away at their lineage for generations. It is a merciless trial for not only them but for the audience itself. At the movie's conclusion, you are emotionally exhausted. The family at its core is torn to shreds, both figuratively and literally in most instances, and bearing witness to the at times all too familiar stops along the awful spectrum of familial strife strikes you as a viewer and a human being someplace deep and primal. And speaking of familial strife, let me talk about how well the characters in this are written. Hereditary features some of the most convincingly human dialogue I've had the pleasure of seeing lately. The harshest, ugliest, yet most undeniable human fears come to light in this. The tension between Annie and her late mother, particularly in regards to her disturbing, overbearing, and intrusive behavior during Charlie's childhood, and the emotional disconnect that formed between the two as a result of that manipulative interference, is very much at the heart of everything that happens. Annie is a confessed and documented sleepwalker. Well, no, the other kind. One of the core defining moments with her relationship with Peter happens to be a time when he awoke to find Annie standing over him, all of them covered in paint thinner, holding a lit match. Peter has been unable to forgive or forget the instance, often using it as ammunition against her. His feelings of resentment are in no way assuaged by Annie's admittance that while she loves her son, she never wanted him. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The list goes on. Much of this unfolds during a dinner scene that is as ruthless as it is relatable, and sees the main characters hurling verbal harpoons with such reckless, sincere disregard that it blindsides you. And it isn't only the two of them. The dialogue between Annie and Steve is just as raw, just as real. Whether it be as simple as a tiff over her putting her work on hold long enough to come down for dinner, or a full-throated confrontation over Annie's potential descent into madness, thanks in no small part to Joan's influence, the dialogue between the two is at all times genuine, making it often all the more difficult to hear. Let's switch gears for a second. I want to talk about fear. It's refreshing to me that this movie doesn't rely on jump scares, which is a decision I can't praise enough, so if that's something you're into, you're going to be sorely disappointed here. It's not about things leaping out at you at 100 decibels while someone off-screen drives a semi through an entire orchestra. I'm looking at you, the nun.
Hello?
Loud noises!
It's the atmosphere that gets to you, under the skin. The way the shadows play tricks on the characters and the audience alike. The way there's always something silent in the corner of the room, positioned right at the edge of your field of vision. The camera lingers just long enough for your eye to find whatever's lurking, only to cut away the moment you notice it, forcing you to question whether you saw it at all, and daring you to rewind in order to be sure. And this is a perfect time to give a shout out to Jennifer Lamb and Lucien Johnston's effective editing. The film contains a number of sharp transitions, often day to night and vice versa, that present themselves at first as quaint and even playful, only to have them later evolve to a point where they become oppressive and an indicator of terrors to come. Bravo to the sound design as well. There's really no other way to say it. The movie just messes with you where the sound is concerned. Though Charlie is only physically present for about a third of the film, that awful signature throat click of hers is on audible display throughout, which does your already frayed nerves no favors.
She is starting to damage my calm.
While there are undoubtedly chills abound in Hereditary, and no shortage of blood-curdling scares, it does have two shortcomings that rob it of its would-be perfect score. I can't begrudge the pacing myself, though I have heard that complaint leveled at the film in a number of places. It isn't slow and it isn't overlong. This isn't scary movie paint-by-numbers filmmaking. No jump or jolt every 10 pages or so to ensure the audience's attention is still firmly wrapped. It's better than that. I found it deliberate, calculated, and confident in its storytelling, the whole affair knowing quite well what information to reveal and when. It doesn't hold your hand, oftentimes asking as much of you as it offers. When the frights come, and they are many, they are severe and always in service of the plot, never the product of asinine notes from the studio or manufactured for the sake of some self-imposed quota. That said, for all the tingling of spines and raising of hairs, there are a couple misfires in the old Fear Factory that dealt damage to the tension earned and threatened to take me out of the drama. Fear is, above all, subjective, so your individual mileage will always vary where it's concerned. So I feel obliged to note that while these specific instances may work well for you, they didn't work for me per se. Moments such as when sketches begin to appear in a recently departed Charlie's notebook, and when a piece of chalk starts to write on a blackboard during a seance probably seemed like frightening ideas in the script, but once enacted failed to alarm. A rule that I find often works when it comes to generating effective scares is in how long the camera rests on whatever the fear focal point happens to be. In my experience, the more time my brain is given to dwell on a monster, ghost, or what have you, the more I automatically unravel how it was brought to life, whether it be the product of CGI, puppeteering, or simply a person in a suit. This can potentially harm my suspension of disbelief, in effect pulling me out of the proper headspace. Time can be the enemy of fear, so the less time I have to decrypt what I'm seeing, the more frightening it usually is to me. Bonus points if I never get to see what it is at all. Shout out to the original Blair Witch Project, a film that actively preys on any viewer with an overactive imagination. Whatever the Blair Witch really looks like will never be scarier than what's already in my head. Let's look at a scene I love from Poltergeist that serves as a solid example of what I'm referring to. The setup is perfect. Diane is earlier heard scolding the children for not pushing their chairs back in at the kitchen table once they finished eating breakfast. It's innocent, easy to dismiss. The next time she believes it's Carol Ann playing a prank. This time the incident is suspicious but not overtly frightening. She replaces the chairs, and in only the time it takes to turn her back we get the payoff. It works because we already have the information, a two-step escalation from the first mention to this single moment. It is such a good jolt, one made even more effective because we never actually see it happen. That said, if you're looking for a counterexample, an instance where time can absolutely be used for maximum fright, look no further than this gem. This is masterful. It milks the moment for everything it's worth. You could feel the tension in the theater come to a boil. This scene strikes a difficult balance. It comes both when you least expect it, while also arriving at precisely the moment when you find yourself wondering just how far everything that you've been shown, all that's been set up, will go. And it is the opening shot in a climax that chills you straight to the bone. It confronts you with a harsh reality. Up until this point, you feel safe knowing that whatever happened, Peter at least had Annie. They had fought, and they had aired their grievances, but the traditional conventions of the genre would dictate the possibility the two might come together in the end. Maybe Annie would even sacrifice herself to save Peter. But no, with this single shot, those hopes are utterly dashed, and a part of you feels silly for even thinking this might have a happy ending. Peter is entirely alone, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. There's an interesting connection between Hereditary and A24's other exceptional tale of a family spiraling through the stages of total collapse, The Witch. They share a similar ending, that being the eldest sibling leaving their family behind, ascending to a place of renown in an occult world previously beyond their understanding. But while The Witch tells the story of a young girl on the verge of womanhood, forced to survive in a patriarchal environment well known for its mistreatment of women, who finds her true self only when that world is cast off, Hereditary focuses on a boy in a matriarchal family, being granted great power despite being the weakest, the most vulnerable. This is subject to interpretation, of course, but I find the notion that the women in Annie's family do not make suitable hosts for Payman simply because they are too strong fascinating.
Women. What could you say?
Aster has assembled a truly terrifying piece of cinema here, one that begs to be watched and rewatched again and again. From its uncomfortable sights and its unsettling sounds to the powerhouse performances that run throughout, I feel confident in calling Hereditary an instant classic, one more than deserving of its newfound place alongside the horror greats. It subverts and surprises and strips you of all you take for granted in much of the horror you consumed, all while treating you to a taut portrait of family ruin. I'm giving Hereditary 4 3/4 stars. That's it for today's episode. As always, thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, and subscribe, and follow Tangent1985 on Twitter for more updates. I'm M. Glenn Gore, and I'll see you next time.